Okay. Look at that, almost 1.5 million views. Wow. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio, and today we're going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we're going to be looking at the art of Lionel LeMoine FitzGerald. This painting at Silver Heights from 1931. I think this is a gorgeous, beautiful painting that also offers the opportunity for some of you to maybe insert yourself into the picture, yourself and your dog, your partner, your kids. So there's a lot of room to particularly play with this picture. I think he's certainly so LL Fitzgerald, as probably most people would have called him back in the day. LL Fitzgerald was a member of the Group of Seven for a very short period of time. He was the last member to join before the Group of Seven closed up shop and rebranded themselves as the Canadian Group of Painters. And we'll talk about why he's sort of a little bit of the odd man out from the original Group of Seven, although it's not surprising that they invited this incredible artist to join their group. Okay, so let's look at the plan for today. We're going to get this image onto the canvas, and I'll show you where and how to find this and how to do all of that. Then we're going to stain the picture with a little bit of color. While that's drying, we'll talk about the biography of Lionel LeMoine FitzGerald, and then we'll do maybe a little bit of underpainting, and then go to the background, and then the foreground, background, foreground, background, foreground, background, foreground. And I've got to be done to go pick up our daughter from her nanny in 4 hours. So, well, I don't think today's painting is particularly complex. It's just going to take a little bit of time to paint it the way that he painted. So anybody can paint today's painting. You just have to have a little bit of time and patience to do so. So if you're joining us for the first time, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, hitting the notification bell, because today's video is happening at an odd time. I'm not really sure when our schedule is going to shake out again, so you definitely want to hit that notification bell. You can also change your preferences for notifications. You can get literally emailed or text messaged, or I don't know, somebody will show up at your front door and drag you out of bed so that you get to paint. I'm sure there's some Google notification that'll let you do that. So you find out when those videos are happening. As well as you want to support the channel with a small donation, as little as 25 cents. Somebody sent through PayPal just last week. You can do so. You can use the super chat function here within YouTube, or you can contact me via the Facebook group or my website. My email is on my website to send an e-transfer if you like. And speaking of the Facebook group, I think I just want to do a quick little mention here that once a month, and so I think in about a week and a half, we'll do another one of these bonus episodes where I go through all the artwork that you guys post to the Facebook group and give you free feedback and support and celebration, because I'm just so excited that we have, 17,500 subscribers to the channel, and I think we're like 650 or so people on the Facebook group, which just grew organically. This is incredible. I'm so blessed to be a part of this incredible community of artists. Okay. So let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do an image transfer. And I've done a free outline that you can download and use. So here's our original painting, and there's the outline, which I traced using the Procreate app on my iPad Pro. And let me show you where you can find that. So I think it's one of the first links in the description below. You'll see a Dropbox folder, and within that folder there's like 300 folders. The most simple stuff is at the very top, kind of introduction to painting, color wheels, things. And then the next 40 or so are more simple, straightforward paintings. of which today is I've included in there. And then a little bit more complicated paintings begin with numbers, and there's like 200 of those, including the Mona Lisa and lots of Picassos, Van Goghs, and Frida Kahlo, and Emily Carr. Well, Emily Carr I've got up here in our slightly easier paintings. But anyway, so once you've clicked into that folder, you'll see there's the original picture, or did I even show you the original folder? Let me show you the original folder. Click in here, you'll see there's the original and then the two versions of the outline. One's a JPEG and one's a PDF. Okay, so let's transfer this. I'm gonna get all my research out of the way here. Lots of books. Been a busy fellow. Now, this is a pretty detailed outline with lots of lines and stuff. I'm going to simplify it. I don't think there's any need to do all of this detail here. But certainly, if you wanted, you could do that. So I just tape that down onto this 9x12 sized canvas board. Right, so I'm painting on canvas boards. I've also taken, so I take them out of the plastic, then I put some extra gesso, acrylic gesso on it, let it dry, and then sand it, so I get a really nice smooth surface. The smoother the surface, the easier it is to paint on a canvas, is in my opinion. Some people don't like it. Some people really like a coarse, rough texture to paint on. Now I'm going to use some carbon transfer paper. And you can see this has been used many times. Lots of lines and things all over there. So, you know, I probably got maybe 2 more times of, and then this piece of carbon paper is going to be retired. So I'm going to just do these big shapes for the trees. I'm going to draw right through the leaves. You'll notice that the way that he's drawing, and drawing was a big part of LL FitzGerald's approach to art making. It's probably the foundation for his entire approach. There's a lot of these sort of arcing shapes, right? These trees aren't just kind of straight big sticks, but they have, everything's kind of curving in one direction or another. And that is kind of like actually a feature of art, and a kind of a way that art was taught really for hundreds of years, and then really got embraced and made the central focus of art by the Cubists in the late 1900s, or late 19aughts, or what do you call it, 1910s, who really liked this curving, arcing approach, because it really gives a dynamic quality to the artwork. Everything, like an arc is kind of like a line that's been pushed, right? If you got a line and you put pressure on the other side, it kind of bows. So it kind of creates this like spring-like quality that you feel like it could snap straight or continue to bend at any moment. And so artists have been using that, I don't know if you'd say like a motif or strategy approach, for hundreds of years, mostly in the drawing stage, and then it gets kind of covered up with painting. But avant-garde artists at the turn of the last century made it a kind of a central feature of their work. And you can see again these arcing shapes in the trees and the bushes in behind here as well, in the area we might call the middle ground, although I'll call it part of the background for our purpose today. Notice like when I'm doing these tracings, often I sort of jump around a little bit. And that's just because I want to go as quickly as possible. And so sometimes I just kind of see, okay, well, I'm going to keep, like as if I'm drawing it from scratch, making sure I've got little things like the bottoms of these tree stumps or tree trunks. Again, most of this is going to get covered with paint very quickly. I kind of see sometimes doing these outlines as almost like a practice run through with the painting, like getting myself familiar with the composition and the like these arcing shapes, which will feature prominently in this painting. Sort of like a downhill skier might walk down the ski hill to kind of help visualize the track, right? So that you kind of start to remember where all the twists and turns are and that kind of thing. Okay, I think that's probably good enough. All right, there's definitely a few things missing here, but we don't need all the information. I just want to make sure I'm not missing the side of a tree or something crazy. Looks good. Okay. There are a lot of comments in the chat. I'll try to get to all of those. I was originally gonna start this episode an hour ago, and then I had to take our daughter, walk her to the nannies, and then get back and get organized and clean up, and so I appreciate your patience with me as I got myself sorted here. Okay, let's move forward. So the next step, now that we've got our underdrawing or image transfer onto the canvas, is to apply a little bit of color on top of this. And one of the techniques that artists have used for over 500 years is called the Imprimatura, literally the first paint, right? The priming layer for this artwork. And there's lots of different ways that you can go about doing this. Traditionally, artists would use a kind of a brownish red color, a rusty red. I feel like I'm going to lose my voice here. And that rusty red is, we'll take a look at how he did this painting in a moment. But that's the most popular way to do an Imprimatura. The way that I'm going to do this here is definitely different than I was taught, or that probably anybody else on Earth does it. But as I've shown through many episodes, the difference between that brown and this yellow that I'm about to apply is so negligible to be almost imperceptible by all but a very few number of people, like maybe yourself watching. But if you didn't know that I use this color, you probably wouldn't have any idea, and you'd think I just used the same sort of approach that a lot of artists before me have done. Ooh. And I just realized I have my paint squeezer tool I left at work. I teach at Emily Carr University here in Vancouver, and I took it to work with me to clean tubes there. So I had a whole plan today. After today's episode, I was going to clean up all my tubes. Well, I guess that's not going to be happening today. So anyway, I got all my paints on the palette here. What we call this is a split primary palette. So we've got 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues. And you can see there's a warm yellow and a cool yellow. Cool blue, warm red, cool red. And what we call that split primary palette means we've split the primary colors into 2. And that allows us to basically mix the vast majority of colors on Earth. Now, if you're watching for the first time and you're like, whoa, wait, what are we talking about here? These are the paints that I just applied here, except I did not put black on the palette. Everything else you can see on this, and I'm about to use this Azo Yellow Deep, which is a warm yellow for my Imprimatura. Now, if you don't have that brand, or you don't want to use that brand, or you got lots of other colors, this is what I would suggest if you want to use Golden, or Liquitex, or Winsor & Newton, or Artist Loft from Michael's Art Supplies, or Buzz, or Peepo, or Holbein, or Daler-Rowney, or Fevicryl, or Novacolor, or Chromacolor, but not Museum Color. No, you put the white in all of your tubes like that, and it just ruins it. So unfortunately, Museum Color, you are out. Okay, so let's mix this up and apply this. And let me know if you have any difficulties mixing black, as we will do momentarily here, because that's a good indication that that the manufacturer has added white to the color, which makes it impossible to mix a black. You're only going to be able to mix a gray in that instance. Okay, so just quickly spread this yellow all over. So this gives the painting this kind of nice warm glow. It also makes it look a little bit more professional. So like today's painting, there's kind of this, all these interlocking shapes that come together in this very clean approach to painting that LL Fitzgerald has. And if you don't get those shapes to lock together like puzzle pieces seamlessly, then what happens is the white of the canvas kind of just shows through. And it always, to me, when that happens, just sort of looks a little bit amateurish. It always sort of looks just a little bit unfinished. And I think it looks a little bit amateurish just because, you know, we don't often see that in artwork that we might see in a museum, because most of those artists are using a technique like this. Not all. There's definitely, it's less popular today than it once was. You know, at one point in time, every artist in the Western world would do something similar. Not use this color, of course, but apply a priming layer. It wasn't until really the Impressionists who were some of the first to kind of question that, because they wanted more bright, saturated colors. And you do get more intense saturated colors when you're painting onto a white surface, because this yellow will kind of lower the intensity of the color, but I do think it gives it just this nice warm glow that we wouldn't get otherwise. And of course, we can just paint a little bit of white over areas that we feel we want to be more saturated, and that covers up some of that yellow as well. So I think this is kind of the best of both worlds as far as I'm concerned. It's kind of a little bit halfway between white and that rusty brown. Okay, so now we've got our canvas stained with the Imprimatura. Let's take a moment. Lolly with the thumbs down. Museum color, you lose. I love that. That's great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about who Lionel LeMoine FitzGerald was and why he's so important, and why this specific painting has been chosen for today's episode. So, Lionel LeMoine FitzGerald is born in 1890 and dies in 1956 at the age of 66, which is fairly young for an artist. A lot of artists are, have to find a living in using other means, whether it's often teaching, like FitzGerald did himself, and, retire in their late 50s, early 60s, and then spend the remainder of the next 20, 30 years of their lives devoting themselves entirely to art. FitzGerald did kind of resign from his teaching position towards the end of his life, but unfortunately he didn't live long enough afterwards to really take advantage of that time and space that he had worked so hard for, right? It's a good reminder to live every moment to its fullest. You never know when the end is near, right? So anyway, let's there's so much to talk about. I've been doing a lot of reading on him. So L.L. FitzGerald today is probably known mostly for having been a member of the Group of Seven. Where's my Group of Seven? So we'll come back to this in a moment, but he really only joins the Group of Seven literally during the last year and a half of the existence of that art movement. He's the final member to join the group in 1932, and the group kind of closes up and rebrands itself in 1933 as the Canadian Group of Painters, of which he is one of the founding members. But one of the key things I think that's important to know about him is that he's born, raised, lives and dies almost entirely in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And for those people who may or not be familiar with where Winnipeg and Manitoba is, so Manitoba's a province right in the middle of Canada. And, it's a, what do they call Manitoba? Is the land of 1,000 lakes, I think, or something. So there's lots of, it's a kind of a prairie landscape with lots of marshy lakes, lots of great fishing in Winnipeg. It also is, there's a lot of farming, not quite as much as its neighbor Saskatchewan, but it's mostly sort of a flat environment with lots of, but it's in the winter, it's unbearably cold. I once took a train from Vancouver to Montreal, or to Halifax actually, stopped in Winnipeg in the middle of winter. It was like right before Christmas. Got out because they actually changed the trains in Winnipeg. It's basically halfway across the country, and there was a big digital sign outside that said minus 52 degrees Celsius, which is, I don't know what minus 52 in Fahrenheit is, but freezing is 0 Celsius, so it is like unbearably cold, like the kind of cold where you go outside and if you're not, things will freeze within seconds, literally. Like when you see those things where people throw a bucket of water into the air and it instantly turns into like snow or ice droplets. Winnipeg. That's Winnipeg. So anyway, this is where his family settles, in this little tiny community right next to the American border, Snowflake, Manitoba. I love that name of that town, Snowflake. Just sounds probably like what they see a lot of this time of year. I'm sure it's buried in snow in Snowflake. And so this is where he spends a lot of his early part of his life, and where literally where his parents first meet. And you can imagine growing up in a very small town spends most of its time in this very kind of cold climate. People get to know one another very well, and people depend on each other very well. People depend on one another for survival at times. If the if something happens in your house, you need to know your neighbors. And I just feel like there's that aspect of in his work that is he's sort of thought to have been a very kind of quiet, calm, thoughtful, introspective, shy person. And I guess I just sort of think that that's probably that one cannot not read into the fact that he's from this particular landscape. Certainly not the kind of more social, outgoing personality like A.Y. Jackson or Lauren Harris, who are from kind of much larger places in Canada. Anyway, what do I want to mention here? So when he's in school, and actually another great resource if you're interested in really diving into some of this and you don't have access to some of the books that I've got here, is the Art Canada Institute website. They have biographies on many of Canada's great artists. Not all. Edwin Holgate, who we looked at last week, isn't on here. But this gives a lot more in-depth information than you might see on Wikipedia. But essentially, one of the things that, you know, as a young boy growing up on a kind of farm in a small town, the expectation of becoming an artist is very low. In fact, he leaves school at age 14, which is not uncommon at the time, to help his family make money, to support themselves. And one of the jobs that he has is not as a boy working on a farm, but instead working in an office. So back in the day, you'd have like the office boy, you know, the kid that's going around filling cups with coffee and putting logs into the fireplace and, you know, sharpening pencils for people, doing all these sort of little office activities in the background. And one of the things that he says, like, working in that environment, he noticed that, you know, many of the people, because he was working at this graphic design firm, they're all drawing, so he's sort of kind of like, oh, this is kind of cool, these people are drawing for a living, this is kind of neat. So he kind of self-educates himself in drawing, and this is one of the books that he would have drawn from. And so these are, you know, we don't really see these today. I mean, you can get how to draw books from the library, but back in this time, you'd often sort of send away by correspondence. You see this in the back of old comic books. These sort of learn how to draw, and they send you a bunch of materials, and you'd have these books that you would sort of draw right into the book, you often sort of completing a drawing that's already kind of begun on the printed page. So this is how he really learns at first to draw. And he also spends a lot of time at the local library, the Winnipeg Public Library, that was once called the Carnegie Library, which Andrew Carnegie was a very important philanthropist in the last century. There's a library in downtown Vancouver, the Carnegie branch of the Vancouver Public Library, that was supported by funds from the Carnegie Foundation. If you ever watch PBS, you'll see supported by the Carnegie Foundation, right? Anyway, so he spends a lot of time at the library drawing. He's not really a the kind of kid who's putting on skates and playing outside. He's much more of an introspective kind of person. And one of the books that he reads is by John Ruskin. And John Ruskin was a British author and educator, art critic, and who wrote, somewhere around here, I have a couple of books. I have probably the book that FitzGerald himself read. But it's sort of like, it's not just he's also imparting a philosophy approach to drawing. And Ruskin is also a big fan of notable artists like John Constable and J.M.W. Turner, who are kind of the giants, the titans of British art. And I mean, here, Fitzgerald, he's quoted as saying that he considered Turner something of a god. And it's interesting because we'll see here in a moment that you kind of be, especially the work we're doing today, you're like, really? He was inspired by Turner? Turner is famous for these very loosely painted kind of like abstract paintings 100 years before abstract painting began. But I think he's inspired by the kind of the energy that Turner evokes in his paintings. We'll see he starts taking some actual classes in Winnipeg, and these are some of his drawings he made at age 19. So we could see he is a pretty talented, skilled draftsperson at this young age. I mean, if I had students at Emily Carr doing this, I'd be very, very impressed. And again, most of this is training that he did on his own, although he does comment. There was a Hungarian painter, Alexander Samuel Keszelii? I'm not sure how you would pronounce that name. My apologies, especially having a name Markowsky, which is maybe a little bit difficult for some people to pronounce. I should know better. But anyway, so this fellow is sort of just visiting for a short period of time, and Fitzgerald takes art classes with him, and he says, like, the whole winter was a marvelous experience. I'm still wondering how it was possible to find out so much in so short of time. So he has this sort of massive leap forward in his artistic ability during this one kind of season where he's studying with that artist. At age 22, he gets married. He elopes so that he doesn't, before his parents can put a stop to anything. He marries this young woman, or actually she was 6 years older than him, Felicia Wright, or Felicia Valley, who was a soprano singer. And back in the day in Winnipeg, there wasn't an art school, there wasn't a museum, but there was a theater, and there was classical music and opera that were regularly performed at the theater. So whether she was one of those performers or not, she was active in various different choirs around Winnipeg. But shortly after they moved to Montreal, and he goes to, or actually, sorry, I'm going to jump ahead just a moment here, but because he's continuing to paint, he starts painting backdrops for those various different theater plays that take place in Winnipeg and operas. He's trying to find whatever kind of way he can to make a little bit of money. He becomes a big fan of artists like Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot, who was sort of he precedes Impressionism, and sort of like the bridge between this, like the Barbizon school and Impressionism. And that has a huge influence on him as well. Corot has this very kind of direct way of painting, and very structured compositions, of which we see, like, Fitzgerald probably has the most structured compositions of all the members of the group of seven. Sort, I would even say, like, by far. Again, he's, of all of them, the most kind of drawing. He approaches his painting as a drawer might approach, more so than anybody else, even though all of them probably did as well. But you just see, like, there's a, I hesitate, I don't know the right word, I want to say rigidity, but just they're very structured, in that one sort of sense that the trees aren't just, let's say in this painting here, the trees aren't just there because he was just sort of, I don't know, maybe I'll put a tree here or there. That he's probably thought about it very carefully, how to organize this composition, that it's less sort of spontaneous than maybe many of the other group of seven members were. Oh, sorry, another big moment in his life is he gets this opportunity to paint the interior of the legislature building in Winnipeg. and he's working with another artist. He's sort of the apprentice for this Augustus Vincent Tack, who is an American artist who was invited to do these kind of neo-Renaissance paintings on the ceilings of the legislature building. But through that, it gives him quite a lot of... it puts him kind of... It raises his profile within the community of Winnipeg. And shortly, the next year, he gets his first exhibition at the new Winnipeg Winnipeg Museum of Fine Arts. And one of his large paintings, Summer Afternoon Prairie, is... No, not that one. This one here is purchased by the Winnipeg Museum of Fine Arts. And I think for $300, which, you know, back in 1921... $300 was probably, I don't know how many, in the thousands, right? So that was, you know, the kind of money where you could use to put a down payment on a house or buy a car. So that was probably very exciting. That kind of like, oh, wow, I could make a pretty good living doing this kind of thing. So here we are. So he moves to Montreal, or the family moves to Montreal. We have 2 young kids, Edward and Patricia, and he goes and works down in New York. He actually goes to art school. So he's now sold paintings to the Winnipeg Museum of Fine Arts and to the National Gallery of Canada, which, you know, for a young artist who's just in his early 20s is pretty spectacular. But he still decides he wants to go and train and take some proper art classes. So he goes to the Art Students League of New York, which is really probably the most important art school in the history of New York City. One might say, oh, what about the New School, or what is the famous art school in New York? Well, I went to an art school in New York called Cooper Union, but there's a few other ones. There's a lot of art schools in New York. Cooper Union is actually the oldest, but the Art Students League is more of like, it's like an art school for adults, like almost like a meeting space, clubhouse / art school, where there's often like some, or at least back in the day, kind of like informal art classes, like different people would teach a class like on a Sunday or a Friday night, and people would come in and drink and listen to somebody talk and paint along, etc., as well as probably some more formal classes. But anyway, so while he's there, he really kind of falls in love with this particular kind of approach to painting, the precisionist painters, which is not really a movement so much as sort of just an approach to painting. This, you know, some flat colors, lots of angular, like, outlining, which is sort of frowned upon by a lot of different people, but like this particular kind of outlining you see in art is kind of important to this particular group of painters. Like, again, it's much more of like a drawing-based approach to painting. And you can see there's the influence of Futurism and Cubism as well in here. Okay, I need to get painting here. What do I want to say? This is a paint. I love this painting. I've done an outline for it, and I was debating, do I want to do this painting or this painting today? I don't know. I decided to do the one we're doing now because it's a little bit more evocative of the style that FitzGerald's most known for. But let me see. We start talking about kind of the group of 7 here. So this painting, Williamson's Garage from 1927, really shows, this is the first, and it took him like a year and a half to make this painting. It's a larger painting, and this is sort of where we really see L.L. Fitzgerald coming into his own as an artist. And maybe we'll just look through some of these. And it's in 1932 that he's invited to become a member of the Group of 7. All the other members of the Group of 7 unanimously vote him in. And they exhibit together in 1933, and then quite quickly fold and rebrand themselves as the Canadian group of painters. I think probably because Lionel LeMoine FitzGerald's had, I don't even know if he had visited Toronto by this point at all. So, and he didn't even meet most of the members of the group of 7 in person until decades later. I think it's in mid-1940s that he meets, what's his name? Oh, it's not until I think like 1942 that he meets Lauren Harris in Vancouver. So and that's like a decade after Lauren Harris has moved from Toronto to Vancouver, and the two of them find themselves in Vancouver. So it's kind of remarkable that he becomes a member of the group of 7 without probably having met any of them, except I think he knew Frank Johnston, because Johnston was the president or the principal of the Vancouver or Winnipeg School of Art, kind of. So I think there was a little bit of an overlap, but that would have been the only person. And Frank Johnston himself was only a part of the group for a short period of time, who left the group at the very beginning of the group of 7. Or was only a part of the group at the very, very original founding and then left. So really, I don't know if the question that I'm now trying to think is, did he actually meet any of these people in person? He had really established himself by the mid-1920s as the preeminent Winnipeg artist. And so for the group of 7, when they're sort of looking around like, okay, we've got an empty space in our group, who should we invite? L.L. Fitzgerald sort of is the natural person to take that place, because he's really made a name for himself as probably one of the most important or most well-known, respected artists outside of Toronto and Montreal. And the rest of them are members of the group of 7, or who are generations, the older generation. So they wanted people that were kind of around the same sort of age. The other thing that's kind of unusual about Fitzgerald joining the group of 7 is that Fitzgerald's whole style is very different than most of the other members of the group. He was also not really invested in the primary objective of the group of 7, which was to create and establish a unique Canadian art that was really focused on mostly rural, uninhabited landscapes, and doing so in a kind of impressionist kind of way. So in some respects, it makes a lot of sense to have L.L. Fitzgerald join the group of 7, because he's quite well known, and he's making a name for himself, you know, outside of Toronto, which is probably attractive to those other members. Like, let's expand, let's go further, let's make this a real Canadian art movement, not just a Toronto art movement. And then, so that it makes sense, but it also in many ways is sort of like, this guy is totally on his own path, doing something totally different. So I think probably, oddly enough, I'm just speaking from what I've been reading, putting things together, it wouldn't surprise me if Fitzgerald, the very act of him joining the group of 7 also speeds up the end of the group of 7, because they probably quickly realize, okay, this is great, we have this really important Canadian artist part of our group, but he doesn't live in Toronto, we've never really met him, and his work is very different than ours. Does it really make sense to continue this group further? Maybe what we should do is rebrand ourselves as a Canadian art movement, as the Canadian group of painters, and that way it makes more sense to have an artist like this involved. And in fact, now we can broaden our scope and invite lots more artists, including some female artists into the group, which by the group of 7 never had, even though Emily Carr had exhibited with the group of 7 several times. So I think he kind of occurs right at this moment and probably sets off some light bulbs in their minds of like, maybe this is a good person to kind of end this group with and go off in a totally new direction. Anyway, I want to show some artworks of his that were not painting, but I think are amazing and are considered to be quite important pieces of his. This is The Pool from 1934. I think this is a beautiful painting. It's just sort of like a little, you know, a big puddle, or maybe the marshy area of a lake along the shorelines, and the reflection of these, you know, the tall grass weeds in the water is really beautiful, and also kind of prefigures some of the late abstract work that Fitzgerald does. This is probably the painting that is the most important of his paintings from a stylistic point of view. This is Doc Snyder's house. Again, this is a painting that took him at least a year and a half to complete, and it's a larger painting. You know, it's like a big painting in the National Gallery of Canada. And again, so there is the landscape here, but one of the things that Fitzgerald is really focused on is not like this landscape in Algonquin Park, like a 2-hour train ride away from Toronto. It's literally his own backyard. This is his next door neighbor's house that he's painting. And Fitzgerald starts doing a lot of these landscape paintings literally outside on his front porch or from his windows looking outside. And again, I think that's just like, you know, so technically it's a landscape painting, but it also is, you know, very, you know, there's houses, we don't even see the horizon line in a painting like this, Pritchard's Fence from 1928. We see kind of like the sagging houses and fences and, you know, people's backyard, the laundry drying on the line there. So, having said that, one of the, let me see, is it in this book? Yeah, I think the this interest in like his direct, like the area literally outside his front door or out the window of his house, I think it's really, really important. So he's painting these. And also they remind me a lot of just everywhere in Canada. Like this painting here on the wall, this could be, you know, areas that I saw walking to school in the morning in Calgary. It reminds me of the neighborhood around where I live here in Vancouver. So there's oddly, and I've, you know, spent lots of time in Toronto and Montreal and in Halifax, and this type of scene is something that I think a lot of Canadians and even Americans in northern states can look at that and be like, yeah, oh, that kind of looks like I see that every day. These sort of houses that are covered in snow, all the tree branches come off and the slippery sidewalks, etc. So I do just want to share a couple here. Jeffrey James is a Canadian photographer, and so he, you know, this photograph is entitled Fitzgerald's Neighborhood from 2019, and we just see these types. You know, this also reminds me a little bit of where Jackson Pollock lived in upstate or Long Island, and you can go visit the Jackson Pollock estate and the barn where he painted in. This could be right there, right? You know, and so we're just looking at, we see here's, you know, one of these paintings from inside his window looking out, painting his neighbors' houses. So there's a lot of these paintings, prints that he did from the window. Now I just want to, so he does go on this trip to Bowen Island in just west of, or it's just like a short ferry ride away from Vancouver here. And he goes on a trip with his family, just really with the intent of relaxing and taking a break. But he ends up doing a lot of work, and it is kind of a major transition point in his life. These paintings, which are really, and drawings that are very delicate, these are watercolors, this is chalk on paper. These landscapes that are kind of semi-abstract space, they kind of look like clouds, or I'm not really sure what these are. And so this is what really he spends the majority of the last few years of his life working on, until he arrives here to make these much more abstract paintings. And I just want to... So he dies of a heart attack in 1956. This is 1952. These are the kinds of paintings he's making in that last few years of his life. I love these abstract drawings. I think are just gorgeous. There's not a lot of these images on the web. That's why I'm showing from a book here, because these are paintings that these are great paintings, but they're not really celebrated. They're not really recognized as kind of his great works, although I think they're beautiful in their own way. Okay. So make sure I see if there's anything I didn't cover. Yeah, so he was teaching at the Winnipeg School of Art from 1924 until 1947, and he held the position of principal at the school from 1929 to 1947. So he's, one of the, not only the preeminent artists in Winnipeg throughout his life, but he's also like a really important educator, and probably did more than anybody else in the history of Winnipeg to establish Winnipeg as a serious center for art. And which, I know some people are like, Winnipeg is a serious place for art. Well, really, probably some of the most famous Canadian artists of our day also come from Winnipeg. There's a group called the Royal Art Lodge, the most well-known of whom is Marcel Dasma, who's a great artist, illustrator. It may be worth doing in a future episode, who's probably 10 years older than I am. So there's a lot of activity in Winnipeg, also because Winnipeg is a less expensive city for people to live in. So you see a lot of Canadian artists who get sort of forced out of Toronto and Vancouver and looking for somewhere cheaper to live, and they move to Winnipeg. And because it's snowy many parts of the year, you end up spending a lot of time indoors painting, and painting through your window like FitzGerald. Anyway, let's get on to our painting here, and let's make our own painting. So the next step here is to potentially do an underpainting. And I think I am going to do just a little bit of underpainting on the figure here. So I'm going to mix a color. Well, in fact, maybe let's just take a look at the original. Just see if we can see any kind of clues here as to the way this might have been painted. I don't know if I see an Imprimatura here at all. It's possible there's just white underneath all of this. Yeah, I see that might be white, or that's a white outline. It's sometimes hard to tell. Another book with this painting on the cover. Handsome fella. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to paint some black outlines on here just to kind of help ourselves if we get lost as we start painting. So I'm going to start with my cool yellow and my cool blue, and then I'm going to take some warm red. So basically we make that a cool green, and the opposite of green on the color wheel is red. And so by mixing that opposite color into that green, we cancel the green out. We drag it into the middle of the painting. And when colors cross through the middle of the color wheel, they go black. Assuming they don't have white in it, because if there is, it'll go gray. Now, this is a little bit more of a brownish color. So brown is sort of like an orange. And what's the opposite of orange on the opposite side of the color wheel? It's blue. So this tells me I need a little bit more blue in there to make it black. And so what that's doing is it cancels out that brown, turns it into a black. Now, we don't need a perfect black for this purpose. This is just a really dark color that we can use. So I'll just get a small brush. And okay, so I'm just going to do a quick little bit of painting here. We're going to cover most of this with paint shortly. So this just sort of protects our painting from getting completely obliterated as we go forward here. One thing you could do is put a lot of texture on here to, if you're afraid of painting something out. I think that's probably good enough. And like, as I always say, like usually when I'm doing my own paintings, I don't bother to do a little underpainting like that. Like, I think I've been painting long enough that I have confidence that if I did paint something out, I'd be able to kind of find it. But I know, but that's also talking as someone who's got, 25 years of professional painting experience under my belt. And I know that's not something that everybody has. So that's why I include this kind of thing here. Just a suggestion that might make your life a little bit easier so you don't get confused if some of this gets obliterated through what we're just about to do next here. Okay. And you know what? I'm just going to quickly hit this with the blow dryer too. Okay. Looks like a big conversation here. I'm trying to... I'll have to catch up here. Oh, there's... Sachel says, big fan of your drawing series. Thank you. Or Sachel? Thank you so much, Sachel. I really appreciate that you've been doing those drawing classes and that you joined us for one of the live stream episodes. That's fantastic. Great to see you in the chat. Awesome. And of course, all of our great members of the community here, Nikki and Kathy and Lolly and Deborah, Blue Dog Fine Art, awesome. Look at all of these folks in here. Wow. Okay, so I gotta get to painting here because I got now 3 hours to get this done. So our background, let's do that. So our next step here is to put some color into the background. And for the purpose of this painting, when I say background, I'm going to mean like the clouds, the sky, and the green fluffy trees that are along the bottom edge of the horizon here. So, and then we'll save the trees in the foreground, our figure, and the grass as our foreground, just as to clarify. So when it comes to the sky, that's what we'll lay in first. And that's, I mean, it's definitely a cool blue, no doubt about it. It's almost pure cool blue. There's a little bit of white in here. So let's bring these two up side by side. So here's our color wheel. I'm going to take my cool blue, put it right here. I'm going to add some white into it. And that's pretty close. I'm going to make a bigger mixture because there's got lots of sky. So just take a little bit more paint. You can see pretty much cool blue right out of the tube, right? So our cerulean blue, as some people, or as this paint is called. So let's just quickly lay this in. If anything, I'm going to go a little bit over top of my lines where the trees are. That way I don't have any little gaps in between them. Okay. So if you apply the paint a little bit thicker, it might mean you don't have to do a second coat of this paint. Just to save time. If, let's say, this area here needed a second coat, what I would do is still paint all of them so that I don't have a slightly different colored sky. I want it all to be consistent. So that's not in the original painting because the original painting kind of cuts off there. So I'm just adding a little bit of extra sky there. Okay. I didn't even draw some of these clouds down here, so I'll just kind of fill in. It's not so bad to have a little bit of blue underneath your clouds anyway. Like, we could potentially just paint all of this blue where the clouds are, and that would be totally fine. We could just paint clouds over top of that blue. It's not how he did it, but it probably, you know, for some people that might be a faster option to do that. Now, because there's a little bit of white in this blue, it will do a pretty good job of covering up the yellow. Not entirely, but again, do we want to cover it up entirely is sort of the question. I think sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of that yellow coming through. Just again, it imbues it with that kind of warm glow that I like so much. Maybe not everybody. Oops, that's not blue at all. Now, as I said, you can just leave that there. I'm taking it out. Maybe I'm just going to paint that there so that it stays consistent with that color underneath. Okay, maybe let's put a bit down there. Again, part of this painting doesn't exist, so maybe I'll just put little bits of sky popping through over here. That's our first step. You know what? I think what often I would do is to start painting the clouds. I think just because I'm in a bit of a time crunch, I'm going to blow dry this right now and paint a little bit more blue over top of some of these areas where it's a little bit patchy. Okay, I see a great question there, Pascalina, and you asked it on the Facebook group about copyright. Let me just put my thoughts together real quick. My quick answer to the question of can you make a painting of a celebrity musician like Kate Bush and then sell it, and will you get sued? I would say you should be probably pretty safe. So if you want to take a picture you found online and to make a painting based on it, technically there is the potential that somebody could send you a cease and desist or ask you for payment for violating copyright. The photographer is probably more likely to be that person than the musician Kate Bush herself. I think it's really unlikely that a celebrity would contact an artist, and I don't even think that they would have the legal right to ask you for, even though it's their face, I think that would fall into fair use. That, you know, just like making a painting of a celebrity, etc., or a politician, I mean. So you're protected, even if it was like you're ridiculing them, and you made it deliberately to make them look, you know. In fact, you'd actually be more protected the more ridiculous it is, because it falls under like the right to kind of critique things. So it's more likely that it would be the photographer who would notice the similarity between your painting and their photograph, of which they have copyright over. The thing is that, you know, getting a lawyer to contact you costs money, and unless you're selling this painting for $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars, making prints that are selling for tens of thousands of dollars, and you're accruing all this money, and it's creating all this publicity, the likelihood that anybody would go after you is, I think, I won't say zero, because I don't want to get sued myself for encouraging people to violate copyright, but just the likelihood is so infinitesimally small that I wouldn't be worried at all. I wouldn't be worried about doing it myself. There is the long shot potential that that photographer could object and could ask you for payment, or they probably, again, unless it was thousands of dollars and they know that it would be worth going to court over, probably the most likely scenario, if in the unlikely chance they were to object, would probably just send you a cease and desist and say, I don't want my photograph being used in this way. Please kindly stop putting it out there. You know, again, if you're selling this work to a friend and it's going on their living room wall, no problem. You know, if it's under a couple $1,000s, no problem. If, however, you sold it to McDonald's and they're going to use your painting on their new advertising campaign, or it's going to be in the background of a television show, that would raise some issues. And I'm sure McDonald's probably, they would know very well ahead of time that would just be a no-go. They would hire an artist to create that artwork from scratch so that they would own it. They wouldn't bother dealing with it, because they, you know, you see logos that are blacked out on cups and hats and all that kind of stuff, so they just wouldn't do that. It would have to be like a gross somebody would have to have really dropped the ball and not ran some of that stuff by lawyers. So I would say that you might read online examples of things like the artist Shepard Fairey, who took the image of Barack Obama and made the Hope poster, right? So he was sued by the photographer who took that photograph of Barack Obama, and the photographer, because Shepard Fairey was selling prints and also gave it to Obama to use it as a fundraising thing. So that made tens of millions of dollars, that print that was based on a photograph. So the photographer is rightly saying, like, hey, I'm due to be compensated. You're making tens of millions of dollars off of my work, so I should be compensated, which I agree with 100%, right? But again, that's very different than making a painting of a celebrity, putting it on your website, selling it for a couple $100, $1,000, $5,000. I think the likelihood anybody would give you a hard time is close to zero. Is it technically violating copyright? Sure. And you shouldn't violate copyright. That would be the legal thing to say. Having said that, artists violate copyright all the time, and it's sort of one of those things where people say, you know, just do it and then, you know, shoot first and then ask questions later kind of thing. That's kind of like a big history. I mean, what we're doing is technically violating copyright, taking artworks from other people and recreating them for educational purposes, though. It makes that acceptable, right? If we're teaching somebody how to paint by looking at great artists' work, then that falls under fair use guidelines, right? But if I was to then take these paintings and then start selling them for tens of thousands of dollars, I would be inundated with cease and desist letters from all the thousands of or hundreds of different artists we've looked at. Nikki, so I hope I answered your question, Pascaline. Nikki says, hey, Michael, do you have any plans to paint more Van Gogh in the future? Please, I even posted in your group to get likes and more admirers from him. Yeah, we've done lots of Van Gogh. There is more coming up for sure this year. We've probably done maybe 10 episodes. So double check that you haven't missed a few that we've done, because there's lots of them. I have them scattered all around here. But yeah, there's definitely more Van Gogh, because those episodes are quite popular. So they are a good way for me to bring more people into the community. So for sure, absolutely. I try to kind of balance it with some really well-known artists as well as some artists that people don't know as well, so that I can kind of suck them in. And then I can show them artists like LL Fitzgerald, and they're like, oh, wow, I've never heard of this guy. Whoa, Group of Seven. I've never heard of Group of Seven. I don't really know any Canadian artists. Well, there's lots of Canadian artists. That's my CanCon contribution. Canadian content on television and magazines all have to have a certain amount of music, a certain amount of Canadian contributions. Anyway, so let's move on to these clouds. Yeah, and just again, Pascaline too, like even myself, and I've got a reputation as an artist over the past 25 years. I've been on magazine covers and books and all that kind of stuff. Even I wouldn't be worried about taking a picture and making a painting of it to sell. Like the likelihood that anything would come of it would be really low. And if anything, probably the resulting publicity from any in the craziest, there would be a lawsuit. I would get way more publicity from that, and there would probably be a lot of artists who would probably rally to the cause than I would, and I would end up making way more money from doing that than I would have to pay out, I'm sure of it. Anyway, so let's do some of these clouds. So what we want is a bit more of a warmer grayish kind of color. So let's take some white. We've got a little bit of blue in there. I don't mind that. I'm going to take a little bit of black, mix this in here to get a gray. And then I'm going to take a little bit of warm yellow. Oops, that was maybe too much. Not bad. It's just going to make it go a little bit green. I hope not. Actually, you know what? I think that'll be fine. We'll just sort of go... I was going to go lighter and then get darker. This is going to be a little bit darker, and then we'll go lighter. So let's paint... I'm just going to paint all of these shapes. Oops, this is some trees up here. And I know there's leaves and things in here. I'm just gonna paint all of these clouds. So again, see how I'm painting over top of the lines of the trees. Okay. So we got these kind of muted clouds so far. We'll give some highlights on them here in a moment. But, you know, you've got that kind of little bit of a unbleached titanium kind of quality there. So, I think I'm going to blow dry this really quickly, and then I'm just going to do that again. Because really what ideally, especially the fastest way to get this painting done, is if I can get the background finished, then I can just paint the trees right over top of that, and I don't have to go back and then clean it. So it'll just be faster if I can get my background completed as quickly as possible. As I'm also just looking at this, I do see it does lighten up a little bit, that blue. So maybe I'll tackle that next. I have to think about it. Okay. I'm going to clean this brush. I think I am going to do just a real quick little fade in the sky. So I'm going to take my cool blue and white. So I'm going to just get it a bit more white. And just have to get my I took some of my paint supplies to school the other day, so what I'm about to use is my satin glazing fluid. I'm just going to put a little dollop of that in here. So I got my lighter blue. It's a little bit, it's just a quick tint lighter than the previous color. I'm mixing in my glazing fluid. So this is going to make it a little bit more transparent and also a little bit easier to blend. So then I'm just going to take another brush that I can use to blend this out. So let's kind of start over here. I'll just paint that right in. Paint that. It's very subtle, barely noticeable. Maybe I shouldn't have done it so high. You can see I'm painting a bit over these clouds. I mean, I probably should have done this before I did the clouds, but... Okay, I'm going to blow dry that again and just give a little bit, maybe make this a bit more white down here at the bottom to make it a little more obvious of what we just did. Shiva says, thank you so much for your drawing course. That's great. And you also said it looks like the colors of the Ukrainian flag. Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Shiva, for saying so and dropping by. Next on your list is learning how to paint. Now that you've got those drawing skills developed, or you're developing them, the next step is to apply it to making some paintings. Pretty subtle. Maybe I'll do one more quick layer right near the... I'm just going to take a little bit more white this time, just to speed this process up. Okay. Now we're getting there. I think once we see everything together, the contrast between these much more intense colors that have less white in it, that haven't, there's a little bit of tinting, will be more evident. So I think that's pretty good. I want to go back into my clouds. Okay, so I think I'm going to mix the same color for my clouds again. So it's my white, oops, well, not bad. My white, my warm yellow, and that gray or black that I mixed, right, to make a gray. This is just going to cover up the sky or any pencil lines that were underneath. I think it was a little bit darker than I had there previously. That's okay. Let's now... I'm going to mix a lighter version of this. And we're going to use some glazing fluid as well. So before we use that glazing fluid, we just want to dry these clouds. So we got this lighter color, some glazing fluid there. Lighten it up, or not lighten, make it more transparent. We might have to add more white in here, I'm not sure. So this kind of lighter color is right along the edges of the top of these clouds. So because it's pretty subtle, I don't really need to do too much softening. Who knows what we'll do up here. Some of this might just get covered by leaves and stuff later. I'm giving a little bit of this on the bottom edges. Ideally, I just blow dry all this, but there's enough paint on here that if I just sort of try to remember where I start and stopped, I might be kind of dry by the time I get to it. Not the best practice to go on, but you know, when you're in a bit of a hurry, you kind of get a little bit sloppy, take a few more extra risks perhaps. Okay, so let's go do the opposite now. Let's take our black and bring this in here. That's pretty dark, so maybe not quite that dark. Just yet, anyway. Take in that glazing fluid. So now we're going to do the opposite here, but before we do that, I'm going to blow dry this. Okay. My nanny was just texting, our daughter's nanny, not my nanny. It'd be nice if I had a nanny. But I was just sending some photos of our daughter, who's doing great. She was not happy when I dropped her off there, so I always kind of had to sneak away when she wasn't looking. And anyway, well, that's so we're taking this a darker gray, and I've got some glazing fluid mixed into that. So I'm just going to put this here and then bring that up. So just like he's doing, he leaves a little bit of a halo of light at the bottom, and then, which is kind of nice. Sometimes, you know, that's like the reflected light or the sunlight kind of shining through the cloud. So it's just slightly less dense in that area. Right, and it just gives it this nice sense of volume. Right, and thickness too, that these clouds have weight to them. You know, the light can't penetrate all the way to the innermost parts of these clouds. Wait, that's pretty good. I think I might just go I might not even actually have to go darker. I don't think I'll have to even mix a darker version of that. I can just do another layer of that paint. I'm just gonna quickly blow dry this. I just keep noticing clouds I forgot to do. Although, you know what, I think I'm just going to take a little bit more black, just a bit more. Just push this, speed this process up. Put a little bit more glazing fluid. It's my satin glazing liquid. And most paint companies, well, I shouldn't say most, but the bigger ones will manufacture glazing fluid. I'm just going to show a different view here. Let's... So just going right along this kind of bottom edge. Remember, I left a little bit of a halo underneath, just as he did. Again, you got to be kind of fast on the ball. I wouldn't want to put all of this gray all over and then start trying to blend it out, because by that time it will all have kind of dried and then you'll have these kind of hard edges. So you got to kind of work quickly and in sections, kind of like fresco painting. It's like that. It's the way that Michelangelo did the Sistine Chapel. You're painting on wet plaster. You gotta paint quickly before the plaster dries. Okay, I think that's probably good enough for government work, as my grandfather used to say. Pretty close. There's actually very little of what we call like the local color left. Potentially I could add that color back in between some of those areas, just to bring that back out, but I'm not going to. But if you do feel like you've obscured some of that original color, that would be an option. Okay. Next, I want to start tackling these bushes that are in behind here. So let's just clean some brushes. Shiva says, you started the drawing class in a different way, and it was so useful, using both sides of your brain. So that's in I think maybe the very first episode of the drawing class, where we talk about the different hemispheres of the brain, the right and left hemisphere, and how if you're right-handed, your left side of your brain is the one that is really controlling your right hand. Similarly, if you're left-handed, your right side of your brain is controlling it. That's why, there's a very famous book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. And she's the one who really kind of popularized those concepts that are a little bit out of date and slightly inaccurate now that we know a little bit more about brain science. But in general, it still holds true that if you're right-handed, the right side of your brain is the more creative, abstract thinking part of your mind, and we use that relatively infrequently. And developing that part of your brain is really helpful in all sorts of other areas of your life. It's one of the reasons why now, like, a lot of seniors' homes have painting programs. My grandmother, who was in a home for years, went to painting class every Wednesday, and I'm sure it probably prolonged her life. Because it, first of all, it just gets you excited and it's relaxing, but it's also continuing to form connections between the different hemispheres of the brain that are really useful for just regular life. That's why we encourage little kids to take art class, and that's why it's such a shame when it's often the very first thing that is gutted by administrations, which seems super short-sighted. Because first of all, I think everybody, especially today, needs to have critical thinking skills. We live in a world more so than in any other time in human history where we're surrounded by images constantly, and knowing how to read images. We take it for granted that we know how to look at a poster or a photograph and understand it. That lack of understanding of how to read images is how we as people can be easily manipulated by images that have themselves been manipulated. So having like a fluency in understanding images is really helpful. I think everybody needs that information. But then beyond that, knowing how to create your own images gives a person so much more confidence, the ability to express themselves in multiple different ways, not just reading or not just writing and talking, but painting and drawing, playing music, dance, poetry, etc. are vitally important. And the fact that so much of that is not part of a regular kid's education anymore is nothing short of a tragedy. That's why we encourage STEAM and not just STEM. Pascaline says, okay, I stopped painting and I'm going to watch now as my clouds need some more attention. Okay, so let's, as I promised, let's do these bushes down here. And we'll do them in a similar way we did these clouds. I mean, potentially we could mix this, instead of doing glazing, we could do it with wet paint. It is just a little bit harder when we've got so many of them to do. But let's start out with a cool yellow. So I'm going to need a bunch. Let's take some cool yellow and cool red. Or cool yellow and cool blue. Bleh. Mix that together. And that's going to give us a very saturated green. Now, my instinct is to put some white in. Well, yeah, we are going to put some white in here. But as I was looking, I'm like, wow, this is pretty saturated colors. So I'm going to add, well, let's put that to the side here. Let's see if we need it. I'm going to start out with this quite light and tinted green. And I'm just going to lay it in all over here. Kind of just what we did with the clouds. Now, if I had more time on my side, I'd probably try to do each one of these a little bit more individually. So there's, you know, I did end up putting a little bit more white in here so that it could kind of block out maybe the sky or anything else in the background here. Okay. Let's blow dry that real quick. In retrospect, I probably could have put more white in there to start. That made it just a little bit faster to get from this step, because now I'm doing it again. Okay. Okay, let's take some more blue now and bring this cool blue in here. Take just a little bit of my black and put some white back in. This way it's going to go slightly gray. And that just is going to give it a little bit more atmosphere. So it won't compete so much with the foreground, because there's going to be some greens. There are going to be warmer greens, but this is just going to kind of locate it in space, which, you know, the viewer may or may not understand what's going on, but their brains are going to be doing the lifting and positioning these trees further back in space. Take a little brush just to kind of blend any of those out. So don't be alarmed when it looks a little bit sloppy. Gotta build our way there. This brush is getting kind of dirty, so I'm just going to dry it off with my hand there. Also, you know, so this right now, first of all, we're not nearly done this area. We're going to go back over here a couple more times. But even if you do this and it looks a little bit sloppy, don't get too hard on yourself, because for instance, this might be parts of the painting that people aren't going to look at too closely anyway, including yourself. Like, a lot of great paintings, when you get up close and you look at them, you're like, wow, it all kind of falls apart. It looks kind of a big mess, right? And that's not just like, you know, impressionist paintings where they have like lots of little brush strokes that you know, become really visible when you get up close. But even if you look at like great big old paintings by Géricault and Delacroix, like big, like Raft of the Medusa, Liberty Leading the People, we see, like if you have the fortune to go to the Louvre and see some of those paintings in person, you realize like, wow, like when I get up, they're huge paintings, and when you get up close, they really do kind of start to fall apart. We could see all the constituent brushstrokes there. And that kind of thing is I think it's good to see that and know that that's happening, that every painting, when you get up close, it starts to fall apart. After all, this is just, you know, as I've heard people, I had a teacher who would call it, it's just colored mud. It's just, we've been doing the same thing that we've been doing since we were in caves, just slopping around all this colored mud. And I think it's super unreasonable to expect that your colored mud is going to look like anything else than colored mud when you get up close to it. Now, this is not mud, it's colored plastic, technically, acrylic. Oops, none of that was on camera, of course. Let's go do that again. Actually, you know what? I'm going to blow dry this. Okay. Let's go all the way to the far left again. Even here, I almost feel like this is, well, maybe I just need to go a little darker in places, as I will. I was going to say, maybe it should be a little bit less intensely saturated, but I think I just need those darker areas now. Honestly, I'm not really looking at the original here, so comparing them side by side is maybe not super useful, at least not for me. And okay, so let's take more cool blue and a little bit of our black. Put this in here, and then I'm going to blow dry this. So we got just now much darker color. Okay, so let's take this darker color. In fact, I'm just going to put a little bit more glazing fluid back in there. Just because I added a lot more new paint in there, so without more glazing fluid, it could be just much thicker and could be much harder to blend. So as this goes on, like there's more and more paint that starts to build up on there. So it's a good idea on your blending brush just to kind of rub it off, rub the excess paint off. Okay, let's just see how this looks from above. Obviously, it's not exactly like the original. And this is like he took a lot of time to make these paintings. So, he'd probably be a bit appalled of our attempt to try to do this all in such a short period of time, but Maybe I should just zoom in. I'm doing a little bit of outlining here in just a few little places. Because it is like a feature of his work. So, you know, sometimes you got to go over top of an area many times, especially if there's a lot of texture on there, in order to kind of get an outline like that. And it's just barely grazing over tops of the surface of the painting. That's a little bit too dark. But so even that's too dark. Okay, I think that's probably enough for that area. I think I'm ready to move on to the foreground. Potentially, ideally, having completed the background. Pascaline says, those trees look like digital art. It's amazing how the artist did that with paint only. Yeah, the kind of the smoothness of those trees, the roundness of those volumes is very impressive. And, you know, it is also a technique that artists like Picasso used in Cubism, and artists like Marinetti used in Futurism. Those kind of the very smooth modeling of forms that is done so well that it almost becomes slightly unnatural. Maybe that's what you're saying with like computer, like like trees have so much more texture. I mean, there are some trees that are quite smooth, and maybe these are them, but when we see a lot of the work that he's done, everything is in these kind of like platonic shapes and forms, that they're like these. I mean, he saw himself as sort of looking through reality to the structure that's underneath, that underlines everything else. And when we think of like Plato and these, like people talk about the platonic shapes, that there's more, that what we see around us is an illusion, and real reality is underneath everything. Like I mean, Plato uses the metaphor of shadows and the cave, but it's almost like a blanket. Like what we see is like a blanket that is laying over top of all of these shapes. And FitzGerald and a number of other artists, including people like Lauren Harris, another Group of Seven member, is this idea of like we gotta take that blanket off. We want to see what's underneath things, like all those little details, like the pills on the sweater, you know, like fingernails and all that. Let's strip all of that off to get to the structure of reality. And it's an interesting approach, an interesting philosophy. I don't know if I buy into it like that, but there's certainly, that was a major theme in modern art of the last century, is trying to perceive objective reality. Okay, let's go to our next step here. So what we're going to do now, we've got our background in pretty good. I'm hoping, knock on wood, that I don't have to go back and do anything there. So usually at this point I've gone into the foreground, painted the foreground, now I've gone into the background. With this type of painting, when it's so architectural like this, I think it actually saves me time to just get the background done as complete as possible and then work onto the foreground. And that does require a little bit more, I guess that you have to be able to kind of ignore this foreground and this yellow color, because it influences the way the background looks. So it is possible that I'll get the foreground in and be like, whoa, that sky is, I don't think that's the right color, because it's hard for me to tell if I've got it when I've got all this yellow influencing the colors that I perceive. So let's now, what should we do first? I think I'm going to do the grass, and then I'm going to start working on the figure. Then I'm going to do the trees, and then the leaves. And then I'm probably going to go back to the grass and kind of cycle back around to complete it. So we're going to use warm green for the foreground. So warm green requires our warm yellow, or let's do this here. And some warm blue. Remember, the more blue we put in, the darker it's going to get. So let's see, side by side. That's good. Maybe almost, well, let's see. We'll paint it in and then we'll just see. The other thing too, as I paint this in, you know, I have these kind of, I'm painting vertically right now, but then once I get it in, I'm going to go back over, because if there is streaks and lines and stuff, I want them to appear horizontal and not vertical, because that will contradict the flat plane of the grass, right? Now, ideally, there shouldn't be any white or anything in here because that will push it backwards in space. We want this to be color at its full intensity if possible. So this is a little bit of a, it's very kind of, what kind of green would I say that is? Well, it's kind of like a grassy green. It looks a little orange on the screen, but I assure you this is it's very subtle green. Like it's like when we think of like a grass, like a grassy green when it's very yellowy, without going into the orange, it's right on that edge. Because we have mostly our warm yellow, which is kind of an orange anyway. And we put a little bit of blue in, so it just kind of, it's even kind of going a bit into the, like a greenish brown, as I would say, maybe. The sandy kind of color. Okay. Let's, I'm going to blow dry that real quick. Oh, I just realized while I'm here, I should probably just use this same color for the leaves in the trees here. So I'm just gonna put this same color up. Now there are leaves. I'm just going to do this where I've got empty spaces. There are a few places where there's some leaves up here, but should I do that now? Yes, but I'm going to take a bit of white to do this. To show you what I'm looking at here. So I added white in there. It's just going to quickly block out some of the previous color underneath. You don't have to do it, but it's just going to speed that up. And I'm going over some of the other green in the trees just because this way then they'll all be very similar compound. remember, some of that stuff on the top isn't in the original photo, so, or in the original painting. So I'm just sort of making a bit up. Okay. Oops. I'm going to blow dry that real quick. I'm going to mix this paint again and paint that into a few places in the sky, or in the leaves on the trees there again. There we go. Now that's a much richer, more vibrant color to underline all of those leaves. Okay, now do I want to do any more down here? This is just a little bit more of a yellowy, warm yellow. I like how it kind of just, these areas in between the trees, it's like there's little, almost like pathways, this slightly worn down color here. Beautiful. Okay, I got an hour and 20 minutes before I gotta, or probably less before I gotta run out the door. So I think we're okay for time. I'm gonna quickly blow dry all that. Okay, so I'm just looking at the original and noticing that there is a little bit of cool green in a few different places in the foreground. So what I think I'm going to do is paint a little bit of that next and then go with a little bit more of a warmer green afterwards. So I could use this color, but it's got some white in there, and I want to try to prevent too much white from getting into the foreground. So I'm going to take my cool blue and cool yellow and mix this together. Okay, so I'm going to glaze with this. Let's take a good helping of glazing fluid. It's a little bit, let's take a bit more yellow. It's kind of pretty dark. Not quite there yet. Now that's a lot. So when you're glazing, you don't want to have a big glob of paint on your brush like this. You're going to wipe it off. It's easier when it's a little bit thinner, I find. Okay. Oops, we want that. Okay. Let's zoom in. Okay, where should we start? Should we go to the background? Okay. So that's our first little pass at that. Let's also go, while we're here, let's go up to the trees and just take a look up here. Now, for the most part, I'm just going to take this and just going to go over top of these leaves, but I'm going to leave a little bit of this paint unchallenged. Again, this is the super fast, sloppy way to do this. Lionel LeMoine, FitzGerald's, painted this painting over a long period of time in oil paint, and certainly didn't paint it this quickly, and you know, so let's just see how that looks. All right, so we see these kind of shapes starting to come in around in the bottom. So Shiva asks, my internet keeps resetting and I have to keep rejoining the classes. Is this class archived? Yes, absolutely. Just like the drawing classes, which were exactly like this at one point, streamed live 2 years ago. They're still up there and you're watching them, obviously. So this class will be up there for as long as YouTube is still up and running. This class will still be available, so you can always pause, stop, go for lunch, go to sleep. It's or maybe I misread that your what time it was wherever you were. 5.6. It was 5. I thought you meant 5:30 in the morning or something. Anyway, yeah, the class is there for you to watch at your own leisure, at your own convenience. Let's do just a little bit more of this. Maybe I'll get a little bit more blue in here. I'm also going to do this. There's a little pathway here. Oops, I guess that didn't need to be red or green there, but it is now. If I really wanted, I could get rid of it, but... Like, notice how I'm just using often the little bit of paint that when I first mix this, I just kind of rub it off here, and then I go back to this, and only when this is all dry do I kind of go back into the big mixture. Okay, let's do a bit of this in the trees again. Let's take a bit of this cool blue and in that green. So hopefully I'll have time to kind of paint these leaves properly, because right now I'm just kind of throwing placeholders in here. Blow dry that. Okay, so let's now go to a bit more of a warm blue. So just out of curiosity, what if I take some of my warm blue and put it into this cool blue mixture? That gets to, I mean, I like that color. We might use that for some shadows, but it gets so dark, the combination, because it's not too far off from when we're making a black. So instead I want to go back here and get something that's just a little bit less intense, because that cool blue is crossing, you know, close to the neutral core, so it's a really nice blue. We would call that more like a Prussian blue. But I don't necessarily think I want to go that dark for the grass just yet. I want to reserve that for some deep shadows in there. So let's get this here. Now we're going to put some warm green back over in the bottom of the painting. So I'm going to keep this, mostly this warmer green towards the foreground. Oh, I just noticed these sort of rolling parts of the hills back there. We'll see if I can get that in. I'm not sure, and I don't know if it's necessarily important either. At this point, I might just start diverging from the ground to the leaves in the sky, and just starting allowing them to kind of take on different colors, so I can kind of focus on different areas, so that they're, because the grass and leaves they're both green, but they're going to be different greens, right? Okay, so now let's take some of this darker blue that we had here, and I'm going to take some of this color. It's basically a little bit of cool blue and warm blue. Gives us a bit more of a cobalt. But with that yellow in there, it becomes a bit more deeper Prussian blue. Now this is almost deeper than any color he's got down here. So just have to be careful not to overdo it. So it's mostly just the area right up next to these trees that I'm getting. I mean, almost like I've kind of gone a little bit too dark. You can see he's got a lot more cool green down here. We could put a bit more of that back there, but I don't know. I might just resist that urge to do that now. At least, maybe if there's time, I could kind of go back and do a little bit of touching up there. Again, it's always just important to remember, at least for me, the goal has never been about making perfect reproductions, knockoffs or fakes of these. It's an excuse to paint, bottom line, but it's also kind of just, I find it just very interesting to investigate other people's techniques. And if we get something that's kind of in the ballpark, especially if you're a beginner and if you're just learning to paint, if you can get anything close to this, that's an amazing, huge, monumental achievement, right? Just because it doesn't look exactly like the original artist's work doesn't mean it's a failure by any means at all, right? Mine's doesn't look a lot like the original either. I could care less, right? So don't be too hard on yourself. there's a... I must have intended for that to be leaves, even though there's not a leaf there. I could make that part of the background. Let's see, I still have a bit of this paint, background paint. Or maybe I'll turn that into a clump of trees in the foreground. I think that's probably my best bet here. And look, there's another... How did I miss two? Well... Sometimes you just miss little details like that. That's okay. Let's paint or start with the woman here, and let's mix a skin tone first. Maybe, actually, you know, I'm just going to call this, we'll start another. Okay, so now we've got kind of the grass on the bottom established. We started with the leaves. Let's now work on our subject here, this woman in the kind of bottom right corner. Let's mix a skin tone to her clothes, and then we'll paint the trunks of the trees next. So what we want, maybe I'll just a second before we get there. Let's mix our skin tone. So we're going to take some warm yellow, a little bit of warm red, maybe just a little bit more, so we get an orange, right? Okay, then I'm going to take some of my warm blue. And this is going to give me a brown. And that's not too far off for skin tone, but let's put a bit of white in here anyway. You could use a darker brown right out of the tube, or right out of the tube, but right off the palette without any white in it, especially if it's a darker area. But I think this will be good enough for us to begin. Also, a little bit of that white will help block out anything else that we might have to cover up to get at this. So probably could have started with, in fact, let's put, I was going to say, I could have put more white in there, so let's just put more white in here just to kind of block because there's like her dress here, and there's those dark black lines. And her hat is going to be a brown too, so I'm just going to paint that into her hat right now. Okay, let's leave that to the side. Her dress. Her dress looks like a kind of magenta purple. Right, so I think we're going to take our magenta, our cool blue, and our warm red, or warm blue, sorry, our cool red and our warm blue, but primarily warm, okay, blah. I'm taking my cool red and my warm blue. Those two together is the way to get your most intense purple. So I'm mixing those together. It's still going to be mostly magenta, the cool red. Not too far off. And then there's some white going in here as well. I'm going to start with this white and paint out the whole thing. And then I can add more of the darker, deeper color in here. Okay, I think I'm gonna, what I'll do is I'm gonna touch that area up. I like how her dress is kind of billowing. As I was painting, I kind of didn't really pay that close attention to that area. But I am now. Never too late. Let's let that dry. As that's drying, I'm just gonna take a little bit of white. I'm going to take a bit of white and a bit of my warm yellow and just, I'm going to paint over this area here. I guess you can see that. She says, progress, not perfection. Yes, exactly. 100%. So I painted that out, and let's put... I'm just going to take some of my warm yellow. And paint that back. I'm kind of like hiding the white that I put in there, trying to get it back to this base color, and that looks pretty good. It looks like it's almost totally disappeared, but now I've got to integrate it with this green back on here, which is a little tricky because I have mixed subsequent colors from there, so we'll do our... Take some of this lighter green. Oops, sorry. How did I get down there? Weird. Should just let that dry or blow dry it, but okay, which will do. Now that I've put that bit of a darker color in here, I do feel a bit, I need to kind of put it a few other places. Okay. So starting to feel the urgency of needing to get these the trees in here, even though I'm not done with the figure. I kind of need to get a move on. So let's do the, even though I'm not, we'll work on the figure more, but let's get a brown on here. So we're going to use a warm brown, we're going to use, where can I mix this? Let's do it down here. We're going to take warm red, warm yellow, and a bit of warm blue. The more blue we put in there, the darker of a brown we'll get. So that's a very reddish brown. We want to have a few different browns in this picture. So let's take another, so let's take our warm blue, mix that in here. This gives us a much darker brown. And let's take a bit more of just the yellow. Mix that in here, take a bit more blue. I think that's pretty good. And then we'll use our darker version for some of the shadows, darker sides. Okay, let's take a bit of water here. Just wipe that off. While that's drying, I'm just gonna little bits. I think I'll just throw some trees or leaves in those places. let's give this tree a slightly different character. Let's give it a tiny bit of gray, I think. Let's do the same with, this one's much more gray. This one here. So apparently he really liked to draw trees like this and really kind of dive into the different the branches, and you can kind of see that here, just the kind of just a pleasure that of these of the oddity of trees, I guess. They are kind of beautiful, strange creatures. Okay, let's take a little bit of black for this next tree. So this is again why painting a little bit over top of the lines rather than painting inside the lines is helpful, because inevitably there's places where we didn't kind of go quite far enough, and then we have little gaps. And I usually like to try to fill those up with just painting, like widening the tree in this instance, right? I doing for time? Yeeps. Okay, I'm probably not going to finish everything exactly the way I wanted. Maybe I'll do another episode later tonight. Come on. Ah, darn it. I was hoping to get all this done. I have to go in 15 minutes here. Let's blow dry that. Okay, I'm trying to think of what's the fastest strategy here. Let's keep on going, but I'm going to probably lighten some areas. And keeping a little bit away from the edges here. In some of his paintings, he's got a little bit of that darker edge, so painting a little bit of a lighter color on the inside, sometimes going right up to the edge here. So this just is going to give a little bit more opacity to these trees so that the clouds and things that might have been painted over top of them aren't showing through. I'm not even on camera. I hate that when I do that. Sometimes I just get so lost in the painting that I forget what I'm doing. which is not a good thing. Some people say that's the best part of painting, when you kind of lose track of what's going on. Okay. Getting there, getting there. I wish I had... Oh, I'm going to have to leave here. Got 10 minutes before I got to run out the door. Okay. I might just stop here and then pick up later on. Maybe tonight, might be tomorrow. Might be tomorrow morning, maybe, when I have to do this. Rather than trying to race and finish anything, because I'm not going to be able to finish anything in 10 minutes. So maybe this might be a good place to stop for me at this stage. Kind of see where we're at here. So there's still lots to do. Mostly it's just the trees, leaves, and our figure. I think it's maybe another hour in here, depending on how long I want to spend on some of those details. But it's better than trying to kind of race, and then usually whenever I'm racing, I start getting sloppy and I start making mistakes, which drives me crazy. And then you end up spending more time trying to fix things just to get back to this place. So I think it's best just to kind of stop now. I do see Nikki asks a question. How do we know what difficulty level we are at when we are advancing in level, if you understand what I mean? Like, is it beginner, intermediate, or advanced? So that's a good question. What I would like to do is make a spreadsheet that you guys can see, that you could then access and see what paintings are at what level and which folders they are with different links to different things. I would say this is probably, now that I look at it, much more of an intermediate painting than a beginner's, even though I don't really think it's that complex. But doing glazing, this intricate detail, that's probably more than most beginners feel comfortable with doing. So that's the trouble. There was another painting I was really thinking I would do, especially because it would go a little bit faster, that is much more of the Impressionist style, but it's not really. It's from earlier in his career, where before LL FitzGerald kind of achieved his kind of signature look, of which this is so close that it's literally on the cover of one of his books, right? Or a book about him. And really, the only way to paint the way he's doing is in a relatively slow way of doing it. In fact, as I said, like, this painting probably took him about a year to work on. He's not painting one painting over the course of a year. He's probably working on 5 or 6 paintings simultaneously in oil paint or somewhere in watercolor. But the way to layer and get these very kind of smooth edges and just takes time, especially with oil paint, where you're having to paint and let something dry before you paint into it again. So, I mean, there might be a bit of there's blending happening, but it looks like there's also a bit of glazing. And anyway, it just takes time. So he would have painted multiple paintings simultaneously over the course of a year and a half. And here we're trying to condense it all into a couple of hours, which is just crazy. But anyway, so we're going to, I'm going to take a break at this point here, and then I'll see when the next opportunity is for me to finish this painting. It might be, probably be tomorrow morning. So like this video, hit subscribe, hit that notification bell so you will know when I go live again. I'll post something on the Facebook group when I know a little bit closer to when that happens. Okay, everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening or morning, wherever you are on our beautiful planet, and we shall see you again in the part 2 to this episode. Have a great night, everybody, and we will see you. Oops, I just got rid of the thing that was there, ready to go. Okay, good night.